All right, hi guys. I wanted to go over a couple of problems with you guys. Obviously, I know I'm not in school, so in order to do the review, I just want to be able to go over a couple of problems with you guys before our quiz tomorrow. So, if we look at something like number 2, it says sketch the graph of each line. So in the beginning of this section, we had learned it over virtual learning. In the beginning of this section, we talked about graphing equations that were in the form y equals mx plus b. And we said that this m value, that number that's with your x, m represents the slope of your graph, and the b represents your y-intercept. And we talked about the y-intercept being the point that's lying on your y-axis. So if I look at number 2, if I talk about y equals mx plus b, this 6/5 is our m, and this 1 is our b. So if I want to go ahead and graph this equation, my first point is always going to be my y-intercept. So that's where I'm graphing my first point. I'm putting my point at 1 on my y-axis. And then I'm going to use a slope, right? So if my slope is equal to 6/5, right, and it's positive, there's a couple of different ways I could get at the next couple of points. I could count up 6. I don't have quite enough room here, but I could count up 6 for the rise of positive 6. And then I could go to the right 5 and get a run of positive 5. So I have a positive 6 over a positive 5. As I said, there wasn't necessarily enough room on this graph to do that, so I went a little bit off my graph. If we're talking about a positive fraction, we know that a positive number over a positive number becomes a positive answer. We also know that a negative number over a negative number is also a positive answer. So rather than counting up to the right and making a positive over a positive, I could move down and to the left to get the negative over the negative. So I can go down 6 and then to the right 5 and graph my point there. And then I can go ahead and graph my line, connect my points. Okay, so our first point is always this very last number that's by itself, and that point goes right on your y-axis. And then you use your slope to get the next couple of points. So if I look at number 4, scroll down here. If I look at number 4, I have y equals negative 3x. So I don't have that plus b here. I don't have that plus some number at the end here. So what I want to do is really write just plus 0, right? Adding 0 doesn't necessarily change your equation, but it helps us realize that the first point we're going to graph is 0. So our first point sits on our origin. And from here, now I can use my slope of negative 3. So again, if my slope is negative 3, we could write that as a fraction as negative 3 over 1. So when I go to find my next couple of points, I'm going to use my rise first. In this case, my rise is negative, so I'm going to go down 3. And the 1 is positive. So then I'm going to go to the right to make it positive. So that's my first point. We could also say that negative 3 over 1 is equivalent to positive 3 over negative 1. Okay, and if we wanted to use the slope that way, we could count up 3 and then to the left 1 to get your point. Okay, and from here, again, we can go through and we can graph our equation. If we see something like number 6, okay, from what we learned last week, we know that this is in standard form. But I want to still graph it in regards to y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to take this equation, this 3x plus 2y equals negative 2, and I want to graph it by solving for y equals, right? I want to get y by itself. So my goal, my first step is to get 2y by itself, which means I have to get rid of this 3x. So I subtract the 3x, bring it to the other side. I get 2y equals negative 3x minus 2. And then again, my goal is to get y by itself. Because this is a multiplication, we do 2 times y. In order to get rid of this 2, we divide everything by 2. And then we're left with y equals, I have negative 3 over 2x, and then negative 2 over 2, which is going to give me negative 1. So again, I can graph this. I start at negative 1 on my y-axis. Again, my slope is negative 3, so I can count down 3, but the 2 is positive, so I'm going to go to the right 2. We can also say this is equivalent to positive 3 over negative 2, so I can count up 3 and then to the left 2 and graph my line here. Okay. In the next section, I'm giving you guys different equations here, and I'm telling you to graph them in standard form. So remember, standard form is ax plus by equals c. Remember our rules. The first rule is that ax, that first term, has to be positive. Okay, our second rule, there can be no fractions. And it's not necessarily the rule, but we just want to realize x and y are on the same side of the equal sign. Okay, so that's our goals here. So if I look down at number 11, first thing I notice is that I have a fraction. So anytime I'm trying to cancel something out, if I'm trying to cancel out a fraction, I'm going to take this entire equation and I'm going to multiply it by whatever the denominator is here. So I'm taking this entire equation and I'm going to multiply it by 3. When I do that, I get 6 minus 3x minus 2y, right? That 3 cancels out, equals 0. Okay, so I can keep solving. I notice that x and y here are already on the same side of the equal sign. So I'm going to take care of this by subtracting my 6. That's going to leave me with negative 3x minus 2y equals negative 6. And then I notice I have this first term negative, right? It's a negative number. So to cancel out, again, we always cancel something out by multiplying. So to cancel out that negative, I'm going to multiply by negative 1. That's going to leave me with 3x plus 2y equals positive 6. Okay, we did do quite a bit of work with this last week. So I do think that you guys should be able to do the rest of those problems, solving the rest of those problems for standard form. So let's talk about slope, or finding the x and the y intercepts. So let's see. Let's do number 16. So we want to solve or sketch the graph of each line by solving for your x and your y intercepts. So what that means here is if I'm on my x-intercept, that means I'm crossing my x-axis. And on my x-axis, my y value is always equal to 0. It doesn't matter where I'm sitting on my x-axis, the y is always equal to 0. So I'm going to take 6x, and then I'm plugging 0 in for y, and I set it equal to negative 2. Now 6x times minus 0 is just 6x, so I get 6x equals negative 2. And I can go ahead and divide it. So I get x equals negative 2 over 6. We always try to reduce our fractions, so we get x is equal to negative 1/3. Remember, if you have a fraction, you can just go ahead and graph it in between the numbers that it's between. Just make sure you have it written off to the side here. And remember, if I have my x-intercept, it always lies on my x-axis, so I have to plot that point first. And then I can go ahead and find my y-intercept. That means I'm crossing my y-axis. And if I cross my y-axis, my x value is equal to 0. So I'm going to plug in 6 times 0 minus y equals negative 2. I know 6 times 0 is 0, so negative y equals negative 2, which means I can divide by negative 1. I can multiply by negative 1. I'm just going to end up with y is equal to 2. Okay. And then I can go ahead and graph my line here. And at the very end of this page, you'll see you have a couple equations not written in standard form here. So your goal for, let's see, it's 19 and 20. Is there any more? Yeah, so it's just on 19 and 20. Your goal for 19 and 20, the first thing you're going to do is rewrite the equation for standard form. Okay, once you have your equation in standard form, then you can find the x and y intercepts. Okay, just like we had done above. So this is combining the two sections that we talked about in standard form. So rewriting the equation for standard form. And then once you have that, then going ahead and finding the x and the y intercepts. Okay, so hopefully this helps. If you guys do have any questions, you can ask me tomorrow before the quiz.